Is Trump bombing boats off Venezuela to test to see if he can get away with bombing Americans in America? I mean, now he says he's going to try to get away with bombing Venezuelans on the ground in Venezuela. And he also said yesterday he's thinking of invading Boston and San Francisco, something to do with the Olympics. He's effing nuts. Still, it worries me that the thought, let alone the statement about him blowing up Americans in America, hints of paranoia and conspiracy theory. But here we go again. How many of today's routine Trump daily rapes of American democracy were dismissed as paranoia and conspiracy theory 10 years ago, or 10 months ago, or 10 weeks ago? If 72 hours before Saturday's No Kings protests around the country, we are at the stage where Trump's lackeys are calling everybody who disagrees with him Antifa, and Trump has declared Antifa a, quote, domestic terror organization, acronym DTO. And Trump has again this week, Tuesday morning, had the Secretary of Brill Cream blow up a boat in the Caribbean after declaring it was affiliated with a designated terrorist organization, acronym also DTO. If we are blowing up people anywhere whom Trump and Trump alone gets to decide we're in designated DTOs, and in the process we are destroying all evidence for or against their guilt or innocence, how far in his madness and how far in Stephen Miller's evil are we from Trump blowing up people Trump and Trump alone gets to decide we're in domestic DTOs, and in the process destroying all evidence for or against their guilt or innocence? It's a big step. DTO to DTO. A big step. But it's one even Trump, even as his body disintegrates before our eyes, can still manage. Miller, of course, of whom even Trump said we don't want to bring him up to tell his true feelings, said the proverbial quiet part out loud in the now infamous CNN studio to remote interview, where in that nails on a blackboard Valley Boy accent of his, he insisted the president, under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, has plenary authority, and then he stopped, as if he'd lost contact with the studio. But likelier, he just realized he really effed up. He had to not say plenary. He needed to pretend he'd lost contact with the studio. Plenary authority. Plenary means absolute. No checks, no balances, just Trump. Title 10 of the U.S. Code. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code has plenary authority, has... boop. Title 10 of the U.S. Code is all of the laws pertaining to all of the use of all of the military. Miller said Trump has absolute use of the military in war, in peace, in murdering what are probably just fishermen. Were probably just fishermen off Venezuela in order to throw red meat to the base or fish at them. Maybe to test to see if he can get away with blowing up Americans in America at things like, No Kings protests. Or more realistically, after something like No Kings protests, collide with something like an ICE raid or an illegal Trump usurpation of a state National Guard again, and its deployment in some place peaceful like San Francisco or Boston, where Trump just wants to pick a fight so he can say, they shot first. And then he can say something like, under my standing authorities as commander-in-chief this morning, the Secretary of War ordered a lethal kinetic strike on a vehicle affiliated with a domestic terrorist organization, DTO, conducting terrorism. Intelligence confirmed the vehicle was associated with illicit terrorist networks and was transiting along a known DTO route. For the record, what I just read, that's Trump's message from when he blowed up the latest narco-terrorists or sardine fishermen on Tuesday. I changed 7 words, I think. It's way easier to do that when designated terrorist organizations and domestic terrorist organizations have the same acronym, and boy, is that not a coincidence. A reminder that a roundup of victims by ICE in Chicago supposedly produced countless members of the Venezuelan-based gang Tren de Aragua, supposedly like 36, according to Stephen Miller. Then they actually counted, and even ICE said the countless number turned out to be 1, which can be counted. Same city, Tuesday morning, ICE. Come on, let's drop the pretense. It's ISIS. ISIS tear-gassed a crowd in a residential neighborhood, and oh, by the way, 13 of the passersby who needed treatment after being tear-gassed by the federal government were members of the Chicago Police Department. See, the problem really is now that Trump does not have to play his Pandora's box card, the invoking of the Insurrection Act, in order to blow up those he and he alone gets to decide are in DTOs or DTOs. You may recall that he gave himself a weapon, and his marionettes in the House and Senate did not even criticize him, let alone stop him, and his Secretary of Shitposting responded by, in essence, forcing all reporters to ban themselves from the Pentagon. Trump gave himself a weapon on the 25th of last month called National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, which, when implemented truly, definitionally, refashions America into a fascist dictatorship. This is not one of those tough-sounding but legally toothless executive orders, the ones with the big 9-inch-high Trump signatures, because he can't control his hand any better than that. This is acronym NSPM7. Somehow they could not make DTO fit here. This is an ominous policy memo, which the White House insists carries, quote, the force of law. Here we go with Stephen Miller and the plenary power business. And I'm sorry, I can't hear you anymore because I shouldn't have said that, and I have to now pretend your live shot failed. Boo! This memo was addressed to the Secretaries of State, Homeland, and Treasury, and to the Attorney General, and it begins with, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution, meaning if this is challenged, Trump will defend it to the Supreme Court with the Federalist Society Article 2 inherent powers bullshit, and meaning that if you challenge it, he will say you are anti-Constitution. If he's really crazy that day, he will say you are trying to overthrow the Constitution, and it's DTO kinetic strike time. Boom, swish, let's go to the videotape. Again, NSPM 7 has been written in such a way that Trump believes he can claim that anybody doing anything he decides is terrorism is a terrorist, or is funding terrorists, or is supporting terrorists. I have read this list to you previously. You can be DTO'd if you emit any of the following, quote, indica of violence: anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity. Does that include saying Jesus H. Christ? Support for the overthrow of the United States government. Does that include voting against Trump or saying he can't run for a third term? Extremism on migration. Does that mean you're in favor of migration? Extremism on race. Does that mean you believe the government of the United States has been, is now, or will in the future be racist? Extremism on gender. Does that mean women don't have to wear the bridesmaids' hats? Hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family. Okay. Hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on religion. And hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on morality. Well, the one I'm clear on here is the one about morality, because I think ultimately I hold the same views on morality that Trump does, namely none. So I'm unclear on that one, but let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 10. Okay, I'll be seeing you. The excuse for all this is the Charlie Kirk murder. I can't decide, a month later nearly, if Kirk is our Horst Wessel, the Nazi youth leader murdered in 1930 who became their martyr, or if Kirk is the Reichstag fire. Maybe he's both. Maybe he's Horst Wessel, only he was inside the Reichstag when it got struck kinetically, when it got DTO'd. Trump's spoken word version of the Nazis' music of martyrdom, the Horst Wessel song, reads, quote, heinous assassinations and other acts of political violence in the United States have dramatically increased in recent years. Even in the aftermath of the horrifying assassination of Charlie Kirk, some individuals who adhered to the alleged shooter's ideology, Mormonism, embraced and cheered this evil murder while actively encouraging more political violence. Stephen Miller. There's another reference to a shooting targeting an ICE facility in Dallas. Doesn't mention that the victims were detainees. Part of a, quote, culmination of sophisticated, organized campaigns of targeted intimidation, radicalization, threats, and violence designed to silence opposing speech, limit political activity, change or direct policy outcomes, and prevent the functioning of a democratic society. All of which should have been followed by, they can't do that. Only we in the Trump administration are allowed to do any of that. Just watch that acronym DTO for me. Designated Terrorist Organization. Now, it has become also Domestic Terrorist Organization. So how far are we away from Democratic Terrorist Organization? Thank you for your attention to this matter. Whether Trump actually does this and tries to blow up No Kings rally, I can't tell you. I do know the gullibility of the media, even pretty good self-checking media like the Associated Press, continues to get more and more appalling. The CBS News senior White House reporter, boasting on her social media bio that she's reporting what I know, not what I think, still wrote, quote, another U.S. strike on a drug boat near Venezuela. Trump says it was lethal for 6 narco traffickers, but no U.S. forces injured. Could we have had a qualifier in there, Jennifer Jacobs? An alleged, possible drug boat, narco traffickers alleged, something other than you swallowing Trump's evidence-free DTO. If he blows you up and says you were in a terrorist vehicle, should we throw in purported or Trump claimed or nah? The Trumpists are also laying the groundwork here. Tom Emmer, the Trump flunky who used to head the NRC and is now the House Whip, is really leaning in to calling No Kings the, quote, hate America rally. And somehow, as Scott Bessent has done, stitching together the logic-free conclusion that the Republican shutdown of the government is the Democrats pandering to the hate America terrorist end of the Democratic Party. Translation, Tom Emmer and Scott Bessent are Looney Tunes. And, of course, they are still enraged at being called Nazis and Nazi sympathizers and anti-Semites and ethnic cleansers, even after the mass leak of texts between leaders of the Young Republicans, especially the New York Young Republicans, especially the past President Peter Giunta, size XXXXXL chief of staff to a Staten Island state assemblyman, now fired from that job, to whom Politico attributed a text concluding, quote, I love Hitler, unquote. And the text, can we fix the showers? Gas chambers don't fit the Hitler aesthetic, from Joe Maligno, vice president at one point of the New York State Young Republicans, plus other assorted Nazi imagery and lots of uses of the other N-word and slavery references, and photos of nearly all of them with the former Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Even Elise Stefanik denounced them. But not Vice President J.V. Vance. The startlingly stupid, robotic, utterly uncomfortable in his own skin, Vance, dismissed all this as a, quote, college group chat, even though these texts were not from the college Republicans. That's a different group, JV. These are from the young Republicans, which means 40 and under. Most of these assholes have already lost most of their hair. So some of the young Republicans in the college group chat endorsing all of the tenets about Nazism right down to the gas chambers, some of them are 1 year younger than J.D. Vance, and only 8 years younger than the Article 3 asshole Mike Davis, who yesterday called Hakeem Jeffries, quote, George Soros's house slave. What's the difference between the young Republicans in the group chat and almost as young Republicans like Vance and Davis? Vance and Davis haven't gotten caught yet. Vance tried to turn this into a debate over the J. Jones, Virginia text. And by the way, I think that not only should the J. Jones, Virginia text be condemned, but I think Jones should have dropped out immediately, and it was stupid that he didn't, and I think he still should. Vance's quote, this, and then he prints the Jones text, is far worse than anything said in a college group chat. Well, that might be true. Of course, this isn't a college group chat. These are the Republican organizations that just have to deal with people under the age of 40, like people slightly younger than you. And the guy who said it could become the Attorney General of Virginia. I refuse to join the pearl clutching when powerful people call for political violence. All right, so who's calling for the political violence here? He seems to imply that's only Jay Jones when the other guys are talking about gas chambers. On the other hand, if anybody in American politics knows about pearl clutching, it's J.D. Vance. But we're really going to play this game? We're going to, oh no, your comment is worse than my comment. This helpful list of as bad as Jones comments was compiled by The Verge. John Gillette, a Republican state representative for Arizona, called for Rep. Pramila Jayapal of the Democrat of Washington to be hanged on his X account. Two Kansas Republicans alluded to, quote, joked about shooting a former Democratic colleague on the floor of the Kansas House. Louisiana Republican Clay Higgins threatened to jail the mayor of Denver. Florida Rep. Anna Paulina Luna threatened to refer him for criminal charges. Arizona Republican Paul Gosar shared an anime video depicting him killing Ocasio-Cortez and attacking then-President Biden. And then there's all the lists of denaturalization, and Andy Ogles of Tennessee saying Zoran Mamdani should be stripped of his citizenship and deported. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nancy Mace calling for Ilhan Omar to be deported, etc., etc. And this list leaves out Charlie Kirk saying Joe Biden, then the president of the United States, is, quote, a corrupt tyrant who should honestly be put in prison and or given the death penalty for his crimes against America. That was about the time Kirk was calling for public executions with guillotines and forcing 12-year-olds to watch them because Charlie Kirk was Jesus. And Jesus saith, let us force the 12-year-olds to watch. Oh, no, I just got DTO'd for anti-Christian points of view. All of which in turn leads us to the reality that at the we swear we are going to transform Charlie Kirk from the racist, misogynist, fascist, authoritarian, violence fantasizing psycho that he was in life into Jesus if it kills us all memorial service at the White House ballroom and mini golf course. At that event this week, that all of the admittedly awful and even inappropriate things said about Charlie Kirk since his indefensible murder, out of all of them, the worst was said at the memorial service by Trump.
Fired sniper rifles at ICE agents and me, but I made a turn at a good time. I turned to the right. Charlie couldn't believe it, actually. He said, how the hell did you make that turn? I said, I don't know.
Translation? Trump prefers assassination attempt victims who don't forget to duck. Meanwhile, after a couple of months where it seemed like he was in hiding somewhere, Eric Trump is back and on quite a roll. He claimed he and Dadams have saved God, which sounds like some Grinch TV show that he saw once and can't quite remember the details. He did another typical Ewick in which he said the quiet part out loud twice. Quote, "My father happens to be sitting back in the Oval Office with the House and the Senate and with the majority on the Supreme Court." Yeah, just a pro tip, moron twin number 2. You're supposed to pretend that the Supreme Court doesn't have a majority. It's fair and balanced and judges everything on the merits, see? Also, Ewick, if Daddy owns all aspects of the government, necessarily, if that government shuts down, there's only one person who could have shut it down. Dadams. Trump shut the government down, says Trump's son. But hard to believe that was not the winner of all the things Ewick said this week. He said this to Weiss.
They're demanding you turn off your security cameras right now. And then, sure enough, we find out that Jack Smith is planting manila folders on the office of my father, taking these, glamorous photo shoots where he has them all fanned out like a turkey. This was the lawfare.
Come on, man. Timelines. Raid on Mar-a-Lago with the envelopes was August 8th, 2022. Jack Smith wasn't appointed until November 18th, 2022. Jack Smith didn't return from Europe to the United States until early January 2023. There may be one hope for us and for American democracy, and that is this. Dadams puts Ewick in charge of all the DTOs. Hey, guess who ain't winning the Nobel Peace Prize next year either? How shameful it is to have 250 years of American history and achievement climax with a half-dead president without a functioning brain who judges women reporters to their faces on their looks and watches only his press secretary's lips and is interested in peace in the Middle East only so he could get a Nobel Prize because he thinks they're valuable and prestigious. Since his deal for eternal peace in the Middle East, Israel has announced one of the bodies turned over Tuesday by Hamas is not that of one of the hostages. Hamas responded to the deal by beginning to execute men in the street. And on day 3, Trump vowed if Hamas doesn't disarm, quote, we'll disarm them. Never mind that Israel didn't disarm them in 2 years of carpet bombing. The peace president, per the speakers of the Knesset and the ever-obliging Mike Porn Monitor Johnson, the peace president is being nominated for the Nobel for ending the forever wars and sending 50,000 troops to Gaza and troops to Boston and San Francisco and blowing up boats. And on their way, they can blow up more boats, anything they find near Venezuela, and then say they're narco-terrorists. Who's going to check? Can't with no more pieces of boat left, can you? And no more pieces of the guys on them boats. All you need is the debris, which reminds me, I wanted to circle back to something this reminded me of from my youth. It's as weird an analogy as you'll ever hear about this, but when I was a kid, 12, 13 years old, my baseball team had a program called the Yankees Con Edison Good Kids, in which, in that time of what we thought was burgeoning bad behavior in public by youngsters at ball games would be recognized for being well-behaved. The ushers, the people who used to take you to your seat and be delighted by a tip of 50 cents or $1, would select a few kids each game, and every time they got a couple dozen kids, the kids would all be invited to another game, and they'd get to go stand in the bullpen with 2 or 3 Yankee players and meet them and get autographs and get a group photo. My sister was a Yankee good kid. One night I was selected. I think I understood even then that the likeliest cause of this was my dad slipping one of those ushers we knew $5. Again, this is 1972. Maybe it was $1. It was a simpler time. But I was not prepared for what happened next. One of the ushers from one of the other sections at the stadium came down to sit with the ushers from our area who used to fill the many empty seats near us at Yankee Stadium, along with people like the groundskeepers and the lunchroom staff, because we were considered regulars, and we used to say hello to everybody, and they used to say hello to us because Yankee Stadium used to be empty. 70,000 seats and 55,000 empties. Anyway, this usher, who I barely knew and who I did not really like, explained, quote, what a pain in the ass finding these goddamn good kids was, and that he was almost finished. He just had to find, and here he used what was even then a shocking slur for Hispanic. I was stunned. I don't remember how the ball game turned out. My father reddened in front of me. The usher got up to leave, or there might have been trouble. My father did not take kindly to hearing things like this. He and I talked about it in the car on the way home, and we had pretty much exhausted the topic and how there were people who would use those terms in public if they thought the people around them would not report them or did not belong to the group they were slurring, when a second issue dawned on me. So all he was looking for, Dad, was the nearest Latino kid so he could tell his bosses that there would be a Latino kid among the good kids? And I said it didn't matter if the kid was good or bad, or if that night all the good kids were Latino. He just needed to find one. He just needed to find the nearest one. So he could tell his bosses that, and they could tell their bosses that, and they could tell their bosses that. My dad kind of spoke over his shoulder while driving, kind of looked at me in the back seat, and said, "And now, my son, congratulations. Tonight you have become a man." Doesn't matter if those are narco-terrorists or sardine fishermen who help the drug runners on the side, just so long as Hegseth can tell his boss that they blowed him up and show him the video of the kinetic murder. The kinetic Trump murdered those guys. Just as it wouldn't matter to Trump if he decides to blow up some Antifa. Only they're just pro-democracy kids in frog costumes. Just so long as Stephen Miller can show Trump the video of that kinetic murder. And one last bit of comic relief. Oliver Darcy of Status reporting Olivia has written a book. Quote, details are scarce, but Status has learned that galleys have begun circulating quietly among a small select group of readers. I wonder if Mike Johnson were to read this book, if he's going to have to report it to his son on his anti-porn app. To continue, Darcy, Nuzzi also addresses her relationship with Kennedy in the book, RFK Jr., the first time she has done so publicly. I did tell her long ago, before her first article, which was about the Anthony Weiner mayor campaign, the primary in 2013, 2012 maybe. I told her, you're going to do what with that story? You're going to write it on a blog? No. The Daily News will pay you for this. Never write anything for free. Nuzzi also addresses her relationship with Kennedy in the book, the first time she has done so publicly. Well, it's the first time somebody's paid her for it. All right, I have some titles for her book. Me and the Velvet Frog. I kind of stole part of that from Schoolie on Blue Sky. Or, how's this? Phoning it in. Or, it's not sleeping with a source if it's just on FaceTime. Or my favorite, and this is considered really cheap of me. I'm not proud of this, and when I say not, I mean I am proud of this. Quote, why, yes, my life did peak at age 22. My main concern here is whether or not Olivia Nuzzi is smart enough to include a chapter in this book about our dogs. Not about me, not about people who tried to help her in her life, just about the dogs, because otherwise I can't think of anything she can write that will minimize or humanize the train wrecks she has caused in so many lives, and the damage, more importantly, that she personally, individually, and totally her own fault has done to journalism and, bluntly, by mainstreaming RFK Jr., this country. Also of interest here, the worst person in the world is the progressive Democratic governor of a blue state. What? You heard me. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this episode of Countdown before we get too far away from the actual anniversary date. Let's take time, shall we, to revisit the worst launch in cable television history. At least the worst launch in which the network launched is still somehow alive 32 years later. October 1993 and the birth of ESPN2. The Deuce. And boy, was it a deuce. Good evening and welcome to the end of our careers. Ahead in things I promised not to tell, except it's all on tape. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. Good evening and welcome to the United Careers. At the Bronze, worse, Emily Compagno at Fake News Channel. They have a lot of dim bulbs there. I think they breed them on a farm in upstate Australia. But there is an echelon of shallow, ludicrous hosts that transcend all other echelons. The Kayleigh McEnany, Harris Faulkner echelon in the stupidity rankings. And one of them in this brood is Emily Compagno. She and Fox attacked those who are criticizing Bari Weiss, the moron, whom the Ellisons put in charge of CBS News. And as I pointed out by reading the Elizabeth Lopato piece the other day, she's really been sent there to take the fall as CBS News winds down over the next decade or years. Or it's Bari Weiss. It could be months. But that's not how they see it over there, through the wonderful, simple prism that the Fox people talk about to themselves and the world they offer to their cult. Bari Weiss, Bari Weiss is being criticized not because she's an idiot and a failure, but because she's Jewish. Quote, Compagno, this kind of thing would make me laugh if there was not an anti-Semitic thread in there. Except the examples of anti-Semitism, Compagno noted, had no anti-Semitism in them, or pro-Semitism, or religion, or anything except people like Jamel Bowie and Hannah Jones and Walker Bragman calling her an unethical and talentless hack who has zero news experience. Is that anti-Semitic? And is a right-wing operative, so, quote, everyone at CBS News should quit in protest. But it isn't even that subtle. We have to think about and say, hey, wait a minute, there's nothing to that whatsoever. Walker Bragman of Accountability Journalism Institute, who I have quoted here before, is one of the Bari Weiss critics whom Compagno accuses of being anti-Semitic. He adds the denouement here, the finishing touch. Quote, did Fox News host Emily Compagno just suggest that I am a self-hating Jew? I think she did. Yes, that would be a yes. Mr. Bragman is Jewish. Ms. Compagno thinks because he's criticizing Bari Weiss, this makes him anti-Semitic. Ms. Compagno is anti-intelligence. She is, in fact, a maroon. The runner-up worser, a guy named Andrew Gruel. What is the worst possible profession to choose if your family name is Gruel? Gruel, as in, porridge. That's right. Become a self-proclaimed celebrity chef. What kind of chef are you? I'm a Gruel chef. In fact, my name is Gruel. I specialize in gruel. Wait, reality is actually worse than that joke. I saw the clip. I thought it was a joke. I literally thought this was a Saturday Night Live parody, complete with fake graphics, because it read Fox News, and legacy media downplays threat of Antifa, and it identified the guest as Chef Andrew Gruel, American Gravy Concepts founder. Wow. Gravy Concepts. Wow. But not just Gravy Concepts. This is the founder of Gravy Concepts. Like the Einstein of gravy. The guy behind Gravy Concepts. Oppenheimer at the IIG, the International Institute of Gravy. Apparently he's a real guy. One of these RFK Jr. drink raw milk who needs that effing Pasteur lunatics, only he cooks for a living. And he was explaining that Antifa is a threat and everybody in it has, quote, cabbage brains. See, he's a chef. You get it? Cabbage chef, you get it? Yeah, you get it? Half the Fox audience did not get it. He was complaining about the picture chosen of Trump by Time magazine for its cover. Time magazine, which is now a right-wing publication. The chef also put out a retweet of Adam Carolla. You remember Adam Carolla. He was Jimmy Kimmel's former on-air partner, the one who wasn't funny and didn't last in the business. Anyway, Carolla suggested Katie Porter had, quote, mad cow disease, because Carolla's all class. The Gravy Gruel guy added in a retweet that she should now launch a channel on MooTube, because a guy like this Gruel fella who has a 5-head and hair and a beard so badly dyed it looked like he used gravy, he should be telling us about the threats from a non-existent organization, and he should be making jokes about a politician's appearance. Gravy Concepts. Chef Gruel. Hi, I'm Chef Smallpox. Nice to meet you. I shouldn't say that too loud. They'll put him in the administration. But our winner, Janet Mills, the governor of Maine. The Democratic governor of Maine. And she's the worst today? She's been a fine governor, a good Democrat in a growing, thriving, ever more blue state, and she just jumped the shark. She has declared her candidacy for the Democratic nomination for the Senate from Maine to try to unseat Susan Collins. Now, how could trying to unseat the deplorable, spineless, culpable American quisling that is Susan Collins be a bad thing? Well, sir, there is already a viable Democrat in there, ready to unseat the loathsome Susan. I'm concerned. Not enough to do anything, but I'm concerned, Collins. This viable Democrat is named Graham Platner, and he's raised $4 million in less than 2 months, and he is a rock-ribbed progressive and 41 years old and blue-collar and part of the new generation, and now we're all going to waste money and time and focus and unity on a primary to get Janet Mills a new job because she's term-limited as governor. Because what we really need in a critical election to kick out Susan Collins, who is 72 years old, is a Democratic candidate in Janet Mills who would be 78 years old, who would be the oldest freshman senator in history because Chuck Schumer wants her there, because the Democratic Party has descended into an old age pensioners club. And guess what? In a time when the Republicans have nobody under the age of 80 except psychos and Nazis and militaristic sons of bitches, Democrats have a collection of energetic, original thinking, dedicated, hardworking 30 and 40-somethings and some 20-somethings, and they should be in charge now. Because it is the Chuck Schumers and, sadly, the Joe Bidens of this party and of this age who have helped put America under the thumb of Donald effing Trump. You guys failed. We guys failed. Time for us to get out. I'll be 67 years old in January if I live that long. And if you said, Keith, We think you should run to replace Chuck Schumer. I'd say thanks, I'm too old. I'm too old. And in Maine, we actually have somebody, young and vibrant, who resonates in his state and isn't going to be 79 the day he takes the oath and isn't going to be a tepid Schumerite who, if he doesn't somehow lose to Susan Collins and gets then reelected after being elected, would turn 90 before the end of her second term. We're talking about throwing out a 41-year-old candidate, a salt-of-the-earth guy, to get a senator who, if elected to a second term, would be 90. What are we thinking here? Governor, you've done great. Go do something else if you don't want to retire. I'm not saying that 67 is time for everybody to retire. I'm not saying that 79 is time for everybody to retire. Keep going until you fall down, but go be a mayor. Run for the House of Representatives. Leave the field clear for the person who will not somehow lose the age argument to Susan Collins. Governor Janet, she makes Susan Collins seem young again, Mills. How old, Satchel Paige asked, would you be if you didn't know how old you were? You'd still be older than Susan Collins. Today's other worst person in the world. Number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me and things I promised not to tell, and this one is going to take a while. October 1, 1993, the launch of ESPN2. I had already launched ESPN Radio for them and was part of the launch of the first regular hour-long Sports Center. I was in year 2 at CNN when they started. I was in year 2 at MSNBC when they started. I was at year 2 of the RKO radio network. Somehow the ESPN people thought I was good at launches. No, not especially. Still, they talked me into becoming the face of this first of ESPN's endless offshoots, the first of the endless clones of its television self. I wore a brown leather bomber jacket, and I said the first words in the first actual program, and they sounded something like this.
Good evening and welcome to the end of our careers. The 3-hour tour, that's Mitch Albom. This is Susie Culver, my new...
And that's pretty much all anybody remembers of this unmitigated disaster. ESPN2 exists today, of course, and successfully, but it only became successful when they stopped trying to make it something different from original ESPN, and management, with genuine heartbreak, accepted the idea that all the nation wanted was more ESPN, not different kinds of ESPN. That begat ESPN News, ESPNU, ESPN Plus, ESPN The Ocho, Tartar Control ESPN. But that's not what they wanted ESPN2 to be. They wanted it to be hip and cool, for kids. And they were going to make it hip and cool and force it to be hip and cool if it killed them. And you. And for that matter, me. It is why they took the co-anchor of their most successful sports center ever and broke up the partnership and moved him to a new network that almost literally had more people who thought they were in charge of it than watched it. And why, 3 months later, when Sports Illustrated magazine chose ESPN2 as the 7th worst thing to happen in sports in the year 1993, only the 7th worst, we were grateful. And I then scurried back to Sports Center, and we all pretended like ESPN2 had never happened, and we almost never mentioned it again. But the saga of why it went so desperately and immediately wrong is worth telling in brief. And if you will listen to it, I will tell you something I have never admitted publicly before. Why, when they asked me to leave SportsCenter after a very first successful year on SportsCenter to go do this cockamamie new network thing, why on earth, given the choice, I actually said yes. Nobody knows this. You will in a few minutes. But first, By the time I went to work there in 1992, ESPN had finally moved out of its perennial status of near bankruptcy and near irrelevancy to profit and prominence. From the launch in 1979 through the mid-1980s, the place had always either had a new owner or a new schedule or a new plan to avert bankruptcy. When I joined the fledgling sports department at CNN in 1981, I used to watch my high school classmate Chris Berman do his show called SportsCenter from what was obviously a closet with one light, no air conditioning, and no teleprompter. Sometimes it would be 20 minutes long. Sometimes it would be 2 minutes long. Each time I'd look at poor Chris, schwitzing and looking a little claustrophobic, and I'd say, well, hooray for CNN Sports, we're not the worst. But by 1992, ESPN had begun to be willing to spend a little money to bring in a prominent local sportscaster from Los Angeles, me, and give him the keys to the 11 o'clock Sports Center. And this company, which did not have any merchandise, did not sell anything with its logo on it, finally decided to expand and launch an all-sports radio network. And when those plans did not go very well, they spent a little extra money, and they talked me into moving to Connecticut 3 months earlier than planned to launch the radio network, and it was an instantaneous hit. By early 1993, then, there were rumblings and then rumors and finally an announcement that they would build upon the radio success by starting a second television network, ESPN and ESPN2. But, and from the beginning, this was the point. It was not going to be just another ESPN or the ESPN spillover channel or the channel for when there's a great basketball game and a great football game at the same time and we want to cover both. It was going to be different. There'd be live broadcasts of games just like ESPN. There'd be a studio sports show just like SportsCenter, but it'd be hip, you know, for kids. In the SportsCenter newsroom, the assumption was the face of ESPN2 was going to be Mike Tirico. Mike had had a very tough 1992, and it seemed like something that could reestablish him in the company, or if he had a tough 1993, something he could be jettisoned from if the whole thing went up in flames. I heard Robin Roberts' name mentioned once or twice, and I don't know if they ever approached Robin, and I think Tirico told me once they had mentioned it to him, but never seriously. So when they called me into my boss's office in the spring of 1993, I just assumed they were yelling at me for something I said, since that's what they usually called me in for, or called me and Dan Patrick in for, or called Dan in just to yell at him for something I had said. Instead, they offered me ESPN2. We want you to be to ESPN2, said John Walsh, who basically ran everything ESPN did that was not a ball game. We want you to be for ESPN2 what Chris Berman is to ESPN. They explained that there would be younger sports on there, X Games stuff, and mountain biking. They kept talking about mountain biking and a lot of stuff with trees. But that the flagship program would match my sense of humor exactly, that it would just be snarky and flip and with it and hip and cool, you know, for kids. They said they would let me continue on SportsCenter until August and then have me work for 2 months, helping them design and rehearse the new show. They actually wanted my opinion, and they offered to give me like a 25% raise. Understand, though, ESPN of 1993 would fight you over an $11 cab ride on an expense report. They would call you into a meeting. They would spend 30 minutes on this. They would then offer you $8. A 25% raise was the 1993 ESPN equivalent of eternal life. Still, I had my doubts. For one thing, as it was, we seemed to be pretty hip and cool on SportsCenter, as it was. Dan Patrick and I had an on-air relationship that you could not practice nor design nor cast. It was just there or it wasn't. We were the two guys in the World War I bunker who knew that the Jerrys would eventually get us right in the Somme. So all we could do was first take out as many of them as we could and sing and laugh while we did it. But I had 2 reasons for saying yes anyway, and I'll save the one I've never told anybody at all for the end of this recollection. The other reason was, believe it or not, I'm a team player. I am not the guy who will come in and lie on behalf of the team, and I am not the guy who will turn away and say nothing when the coach is slapping the crap out of one of my teammates. But if you say, We are management. We have thought this through. We want you to leave SportsCenter to go do ESPN2 and be hip and cool, for kids. I will say yes. Plus money. Only they had not thought it through, as it proved. The first problem was the new network that was supposed to be different from ESPN and the new show that was supposed to be different from ESPN SportsCenter was going to be run by John Walsh, the guy who ran SportsCenter and basically created what you saw then and what you see now. And to actually produce the show, he chose Mike Bogad, who was the coordinating producer of the 11 o'clock Sports Center that I was doing with Dan Patrick, and Norby Williamson, who was the line producer of the 11 o'clock Sports Center with me and Dan Patrick. And although they would not give me a title other than anchor, the other guy running it was me, the co-host of the 11 o'clock Sports Center. To add to this crowd of rebellious, innovative, anti-establishment thinkers who yesterday had been the establishment, John Walsh hired the sports editor of the Boston Globe, Vince Doria. To my mind, Vince would cover himself in glory at ESPN2 by once proposing a really bad idea, a laugh track for the Nick Bakay comedy segments. And when I said, that's a really bad idea, it's still a newscast, what if we have a laugh track someday when some team's plane crashes? He said, you're right. I'm thinking maybe I don't know as much about this TV stuff as I thought I did. Will you tell me the next time I have an idea that's that bad? But at this point, Vince was thinking maybe we could differentiate ESPN2 from ESPN by showing baseball and basketball box scores overnight. There was an opinion, and Vince held it, that we should be the Christian Science monitor of sportscasts on ESPN2, which was definitely not, for kids. The show producers they brought in were also mainstream. My friend and producer Ron Grelnick came in from Los Angeles. He actually thought they meant the stuff about younger sports. He bought a magazine rack and subscribed us to all kinds of biking magazines and hiking magazines, and nobody ever read them. They hired producers from Madison Square Garden Network. They hired associate producers from SportsCenter and made them producers. To join me on the anchor desk, they hired a newspaper columnist from Detroit named Mitch Albom. And they hired all the local sportscasters they did not have room for on SportsCenter, and among them was a guy named Stu Scott. And Stu was great, but Stu and everybody else just came in and did regular sportscasts, just as if they'd been on regular flavor ESPN. Finally, to be my real co-host, they were going to hire... Well, we never found out who they were going to hire because one day the word came through that the chairman of ABC Cap Cities, which owned ESPN and everything else, had seen this weekend sportscaster in West Palm Beach doing a tennis tournament of some sort or rain delay during a tennis tournament or something and thought she was great. And overnight, there was a bidding war for her, and we had just hired her to be my co-host, and her name was Susie Colbert. Everybody on this renegade network, including me, was thoroughly non-renegade. It became rather apparent rather quickly that management's understanding of what made something cool and hip, for kids, was, you ready? What clothing we wore. This is the story of the infamous leather jacket I wore the first night, which you will hear when Countdown continues after this. Back to the number one story on the Countdown and things I promised not to tell on Saturday's 29th anniversary of the launch of ESPN2, or as I described it to Kenny Maine for his podcast yesterday, the Titanic, only it's on fire first. As I said, the organizing principle was forced hipness, and the organizing principle of forced hipness was the clothing we wore. And that brings us to the primary image that still appears whenever the launch of ESPN2 is broached or Googled, my infamous brown leather bomber jacket. Fall comes early to Bristol, Connecticut, and if it were not cold enough there at the end of September 1993, there was also something wrong with our new ESPN2 studio. No matter what they did to the air conditioning system in there, it was like 48 degrees all the time. So I was standing outside one day trying to get warm, contemplating the succession of train wrecks that had been our first 5 or 6 pilot shows and dry runs, and I was wearing my brown leather bomber jacket because it was cold, when another of the many executive producers, John Lack, came over to say hi. And he was in mid-sentence when he looked at the jacket and went stone cold silent. Wait, he finally said, the word eureka forming over his head. Could you, if I asked you, would you wear that jacket on the show? I pretended to hesitate. I realized only the jacket could save me from freezing to death in our winter on the TV version of the Donner Party, and so I said, I suppose. And that's why I was wearing that jacket. It was cold in the studio. Why they gave Steve Buckley from the Boston Herald a baseball cap to wear on the air for his segments and wear backwards. Why they put other guys in football helmets and insisted that nobody wear a tie ever, not even former Boston College football coach Jack Bicknell. That should be obvious, for kids. It became rapidly apparent that all ESPN2 was ESPN dressed up differently. I had a leather coat. The on-screen graphics were in lowercase letters only. The camera was not on a tripod. It was carried around by a cameraman who soon had a bad back. The other problem was exemplified by that fellow John Lack. I liked him. He had run MTV News, and he actually had some ideas about differentiating presentation and content for younger audiences. But by the time he suggested the jacket, he also had a second message for me. Listen, he said, I can't get through to these people. They tell me I'm in charge, and then they tell me our first new hip revolutionary story is going to be a profile of Doug Flutie, the quarterback, and I say, how's that different from SportsCenter? And they look at me like I'm crazy, and they say, he's playing in Canada. We'll be doing a story about Canada. Who would believe we're going to do a story about Canada? But I know you get it, Keith. So when we're actually on the air, you have to keep it different. You have to be in charge. When we're on, you are the executive producer. This was extremely bad news because by my count, this would have made me the 15th or 16th different person who believed they were in charge. There was John Lack, there was Walsh, there was a new vice president named Howard Katz, there was Vince Doria, there were the two SportsCenter guys, Norby and Bogey, there were the line producers, there were a couple of consultants, there was the president of ESPN, Steve Bornstein, there was the chairman of ABC who had discovered Susie Kolber, there was the guy who put in the state-of-the-art air conditioning system in the studio, there was the other guy, Walter Cronkite's lighting director, as he kept telling us, who put in the state-of-the-art lighting system, all of us, individually, in charge. So nobody was in charge. The night before the premiere, so September 30th, 1993, John Walsh, the SportsCenter man, saw me in the hallway and said, listen, I just got some amazing information from audience research. Do you know which show in all of television has the highest percentage of viewers who are aged 18 to 24? This was an important question, a relevant question, because these were the kids, for kids. ESPN2 had been created to get that 18 to 24-year-old audience. So I guess the answer was, some show on MTV. No, Walsh said gleefully. It's SportsCenter. And I froze. And I said, wait, John, if we already have the 18 to 24-year-old audience, why are we starting a new network to get the 18 to 24-year-old audience? Do you really think they're going to give up the show they like and move to a new show on a new channel just cause? And Walsh laughed and shrugged and shuffled down the hallway, and I called a cab to take me to the Hartford airport so I could leave the country. Only at the last minute I chickened out. The premiere, October 1st, began with me, I swear this is true, going to shave in my house and instead dropping and breaking a mirror. The network signed on at 7 p.m. with the national anthem and some sort of statement from Chris Berman blessing it. And then a very long sketch parody of the then hit film The Fugitive, in which I was the fugitive from SportsCenter. Get it? The fugitive from SportsCenter, you get it? Then the lights came on, the poor guy with the camera staggered in, and I said, good evening and welcome to the end of our careers. The television sports writer of the Associated Press, John Nelson, was there in the studio. He immediately flashed that quote to a not waiting world, and ESPN2 and Sports Night were born. For kids. The first night seemed okay. largely because ESPN threw a party in the parking lot under a gigantic tent, free food and booze. Hundreds of staffers and guests and celebrities and free booze. That place later became known as the Tent of Consent. Don't ask me. I was on the air for 3 hours. I had nothing to do with this. Later that night, near the tent, the network president stumbled crossing a little bridge over a stream and wound up in the water. And he still had a better night than we did. The shows bounced from topic to topic and mood to mood. Once, with Bill Pito anchoring with me, Sports Night ran a mini documentary on a high school basketball star who chose which college to go to play ball at entirely by letter and telephone. Only when he arrived did he discover he was the only white guy in an entirely black conference. We showed the first 10 minutes of this extraordinary story. Then we promised to show you the rest of it. And then we welcomed a live studio guest, Eddie Layton, the organist from Yankee Stadium. He played a few tunes, and then we went back to part 2 of this very grim documentary about this very dim basketball player. And that hour was kind of good compared to the rest of them. Eventually, we moved Sports Night from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights to Monday through Friday at 5 p.m., so Sports Night was on in the afternoons. Though it was December, the limitless air conditioning continued. Susie Kolber began to wear a blanket on her lap just out of camera view. I begged to be returned to SportsCenter, and they agreed, provided I gave back the raise and extended my contract for a year and gave back a little bit more. Sports Illustrated, at that point still the leading and most influential sports media outlet in the world, warned us it was going to list in its year-end issue the worst things to happen in sports in 1993, and we, ESPN2, were going to be on it. And when the magazine came out, there on the list, behind the stabbing of the tennis star Monica Seles by a fan of her rival Steffi Graf, and behind Michael Jordan's retirement, and behind a college football player suing his coach because somebody else became the starting quarterback, there we were. Sports Illustrated's choice as the 7th worst thing in sports for 1993, and the reaction of the anchors and the staff and even the management and all 18 people who were in charge of ESPN2 Sports Night was unanimous. Hooray! We're not the worst! We're not the worst! We're not the worst! In my last week anchoring the show, we discovered that Walter Cronkite's lighting guy had never spoken to the guy who put in the air conditioning system. Walter Cronkite's lighting guy had focused the principal backlight in his state-of-the-art lighting system directly onto the principal monitor for the other guy's state-of-the-art air conditioning system. So the state-of-the-art air conditioning system had spent 6 months thinking the temperature in the studio was 217 degrees. They let me go back to SportsCenter, providing I gave back all the extra money, and I happily did it, and a little more. Sports Night staggered on for a few more weeks before being canceled, and all the talent, Stuart Scott, Susie Kolber, Bill Pito, and the guy they hired to replace me when I escaped back to SportsCenter, Kenny Maine, they all went on to do SportsCenter. As to ESPN2, we all pretended that never happened. It's just a bad dream. And then there was that other reason I had agreed to try it. I have not told anybody this. I don't even think I told the other person involved this. But the night before ESPN management called me in and said, we'd like you to leave SportsCenter and become the face of ESPN2, a woman I worked with at ESPN said, yes, she would like to go out with me, but that doing that while we worked together would be a disaster. So, after management's offer, I asked her if my new schedule, which took me away from her department, was sufficient professional distance so that she'd feel comfortable dating, and she said yes. So I said yes, and we started dating. And that didn't work out either. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Oh my God, was that a mistake? Most of our countdown music was arranged, performed, and produced by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, our musical directors of Countdown. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc., is the sports music. Who wrote the ESPN2 original theme? I'm wondering if that was John, who did all of the music for us and for Ken Burns. It's an interesting combination. Was it John? I'll have to look it up. Not John Shelby. He was an outfielder. John, I'll go look it up. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend Stevie Van Zandt. Everything else was, as always, my fault. That's Countdown for today, day 270 of America held hostage. Just 1,193 days until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck, lame brain term, unless he's removed sooner by MAGA or Epstein or that pavement patch on his hand or an escalator or the psychopathy test or Tylenol or who knows what. The next scheduled countdown is Monday. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.